Okay, so let's look at Continuum by Alan Curnow. The moon rolls over the roof and falls behind my house. And the moon does neither of these things. I'm talking about myself. It's not possible to get off to sleep or the subject or the planet, nor to think thoughts. Better to barefoot it out at the front door and lean from the porch across the privets and the palms into the washed-out creation, a dark place with two particular bright clouds dusted, query, by the moon. One's mine, the other's an adversary, which may depend on the wind or something. A long moment stretches, the next one is not on time. Not unaccountably, the chill of the planking underfoot rises in the throat. For its part, the night sky empties the whole of its contents down. Turn on a bare heel, close the door behind on the author, cringing demiurge, who picks up his litter and his tools and paces me back to bed, stealthily in step. Okay. I think this is another one a bit like High Beauty, where you read the first stanza and you kind of have that initial, what on earth is he talking about moment? And I think the danger of that is that particularly at your young age, it can really put you off and it can make you feel quite negative about the poem. That's always a danger, I think, with poetry. And they always seem to choose these sorts of poems in the anthologies as well. But it's not that hard, actually. It's a fairly straightforward poem once you get past the sort of the surface. Think about the title, Continuum. Continuum is a continuous something. With no beginning, middle, and end, etc. Something which is continuous. Funnily enough, continuum. Something which continues. And when you know that this is about the poet, the narrator, who can't sleep, the first thing you realise is that anyone who's suffered from insomnia knows that feeling of lying in bed, and it just the time doesn't seem to have any division. It's just this great big long, drawn out, rather dull block of time which never seems to end. And so the first thing we can say about the title of the poem, and it is important to write about the title. If you've got anything to say, really do try and say something about the title. Examiners love that as well. So this continuum, this sense of time being somehow unbound when you're lying awake at night. So then he goes on this first stanza, the moon rolls over the roof and falls behind my house, and the moon does neither of these things. I'm talking about myself. This is a very traditional poetic image. Okay, the moon, it's kind of a bit of a cliche, really, and Curnow uses it because it is a bit of a cliche. And rolling over the roof and falling behind my house. Well, the moon doesn't actually do that, does it? It's not the moon rolling and falling. We move. The moon doesn't. So it's this kind of. I think what one of the first things you can say about this poem is it's about the poet sort of questioning the poet's technique. The way the poet gives, personifies things. It's not true, it's not real, so why do it? But actually what we realise is that what the poet is talking about is that if he rolls over the roof and falls behind the house, it's him doing the writing. And he's not doing a very good job. And he realises, as a poet, he's doing a pretty poor job. He's failing. If you're writing in this way, in this rather cliched way, actually he's talking about himself. He's talking about himself as a poet. Maybe him falling behind and rolling over. Maybe it's him rolling over in bed. Maybe it's him falling behind with his work. Who knows? Actually, he's talking about himself. And you've probably seen that with so many of the poems we've looked at so far, or you've looked at so far. Really, they're talking about themselves. Poets are good at that. They're quite self-indulgent. They like talking about themselves. If we just move down a little bit, it's not possible to get off to sleep or the subject or the planet. So getting off to sleep, getting off the subject, or getting off the planet. There are three things there that he's talking about that you can't get off. Okay? that whatever you do, you're unable to change or stop. If you're an insomniac getting off to sleep, and anyone who is will know exactly what I'm talking about. Getting off the subject, a poet may be labouring the point a bit, going on and on about something, and you can't get off the planet. You're on the planet and you're not going anywhere. Well, I think this is quite interesting here. It's not possible to think thoughts. What do you think he means by that? I think he means this. Thoughts just are. Thinking suggests that you're consciously able to stop them, turn them on and off. But I think what he's saying here is that thinking is not a conscious process. Thinking just is. Thoughts just happen. You don't think thoughts. Thoughts just are. So then we get him going, changing his mind. He's been lying in bed, thinking about himself, thinking about how it's not possible to do things like get back to sleep, can't get off the planet, he can't stop thinking. And so it's better that he just goes out onto the front, out of the front door in his bare feet, and lean out of the porch into the washed out creation, into the dawn, maybe the light's just starting to come up and he's just starting to see the dawn. So the idea of creation, God's creation, being somehow washed out, or maybe he's feeling washed out. I mean, there could be a couple of meanings to that. Could it be the world? Could it be the light? Could it be just how he feels about himself or about the world? Maybe a negativity that he feels about the world. And maybe that dark place there, again, is two meanings. Is it the dark place of the night, or is it the dark place about how he feels? And then he goes on to talk about these two particular bright clouds dusted, query, by the moon. So why does he do that? Let's just think about that for a moment. Because he's making a comment here as much about the poetic writing process as he is about anything. And what he's doing, again, like the beginning, he's calling into question the language he uses, or the language a poet uses. So he's querying, is that the right word to use? Should he be using a word like dusted? Because actually it's not dusted, is it? Dust is something that you have in a house which needs a hoover or needs dusting. You don't dust, clouds don't dust the moon. So he's calling into question the whole idea of this sort of poetic language, and that links back into the moon rolling over the roof. The moon doesn't actually roll, so it's as if he's kind of lying there at night, really thinking about himself as a poet, and thinking about really maybe how inadequate he is as a poet, and how difficult it is to really describe the world as it is without lapsing into these kind of rather vague, overly poetic terms. So two particular bright clouds dusted by the moon, one's mine, the other's an adversary, which may depend on the wind or something. And I think that links into the query again. He's not sure what's going on with these clouds. He's not sure whether he's using the right words. There's a real sense of him feeling quite lost within language here, I think. That it's as if the power of language has somehow deserted him, and he's kind of questioning his whole approach about using language. I mean, it might depend on the wind or something. That's a very vague term, suggesting of the vagueness of how he feels. And then we move on here into the last few stanzas. We've got this full stop here indicating a new section. You can see here we've had a full stop in the first stanza, but actually we've had no other full stops. We've got these three stanzas here. It's all one sentence. I think he's doing this to suggest this kind of train of thought, really. That he's lying in bed and then he gets up and this is all one thought. But then the long moment stretches. There's this idea of talking about time here. And I love the next one is not on time. That time seems to be somehow random. It's not linear, it's not straight, it's not measured or measurable. That one moment will go on for ages and the next minute just doesn't seem to turn up and then it turns up. And then there's this kind of strange link here between the planking underfoot but rising it in the throat. Not quite sure about that. Maybe something to do with how the chill affects his body, maybe. Could be something to do with age. He's getting a bit old, feeling a bit of a chill. And again, there's this sort of overly poetic term here. For its part, the night sky emptied the whole of its contents down. Slightly overblown there, and again, it's all linking back to this kind of not really sure whether he's using the right language. Then it changes, quite interesting. Very, very simple. Turn on a bare heel, close the door behind, on the author. Much more simple language, much more direct. And it's as if he's come to an understanding. The author is him. That's the poet. It's Curnow. And he calls himself a cringing demiurge. This is a strange term. The demiurge is a sort of a mythic, godlike figure. And a kind of a craftsman. And someone who fashions and maintains the universe. Fairly small job. Sort of like a god, but not quite a god. Not quite the whole thing. More of a craftsman than a creator. The difference between an artist and a craftsman, it's that kind of thing. You can call it a god. The god of Gerald Manley Hopkins is a great artist, creating these beautiful things. A demiurge is slightly less grand than a god. Someone who creates things in a sort of workmanlike way, as opposed to someone who creates things through great brilliance or great creativity. And I think this is quite a nice word to use for the poet, because it's the idea of him crafting what we call the best fit through language. Do you see what I mean? It's not that he can nail it perfectly, but he gets the best fit. A bit small down there, sorry. I think that links back to the Manley Hopkins poem that we looked at before. Up here, look. That Manley Hopkins is trying to get the best fit through language, and that idea of inscape that I talked about in stress, that he's trying to get to the sort of the essence of nature through language, but and he's having to make words up because he can't find the right words. I think there's this suggestion with Continuum, there's a similar thing going on here. That Alan Curnow is struggling. He's struggling with language. He's struggling with his idea of himself as a poet, and all of this, all the way through the poem, there's that sense of struggle, and that cringing demiurge, that he's cringing before the beauty of the world, maybe cringing before the complexity of the world, that he's not quite good enough. That he cringes because he's not good enough. He feels quite pathetic, I think. Then you get this strange mixture of pronouns, he and me, both talking about himself, and that link between, that these, almost as if he's stepping outside of himself and back in. And I think a poet does that. I think a poet will step outside of himself. But it's a strange way to finish. Picks up his litter and his tools and paces me back to bed stealthily in step. That he sort of slopes back to bed, I suppose. Picks up his litter, maybe his paper on the floor, his tools, maybe his pen, and then paces back to bed. Just a quick note on the form. Those very strict 3-line stanzas. I think he does this as most poets do who write in a strict form, to kind of order his thoughts. to kind of get some order in amongst the chaos of his mind. Because there is something chaotic about Curnow in this poem. That he's struggling to get his words in the right order, his words down on paper. He's lapsing into cliche, and I think this very tight 3-line structure kind of forces a bit of order into it. It's an interesting poem.